So as you already know, we're here to discuss all things Facebook Libra. Although we are a fintech event, we want to keep the dialogue as open and accessible as possible. So if there's any jargon that's used by any of the panelists, feel free to check them on that and throw up your hand. If we hear words like decentralized or protocol consensus, I might ask you to give a quick 2-minute or 2-sentence definition of that, just for added complexity. But in terms of our definitions, I think it's good if we start at the very basics. There may be different audience knowledge about what Libra is. Everyone knows it's Facebook's cryptocurrency. But what are some of the words? So for instance, there's Libra and there's Calibra. What are the things that, so what are the definitions for when we're using Facebook's cryptocurrency? What is Libra?
Well, Libra is the actual cryptocurrency that'll be transferred around, and Calibra is the company. It's a separate company to Facebook that'll be responsible for managing the token. In terms of the Libra, what's its value? My understanding is essentially going to be like a stable coin. It'll be a basket of the world's top 4 currencies. So there'll be less focus on single currency risk, but it'll still be very much like a traditional fiat currency in terms of you've got the government there. There's potential for debasement each year as they manage their own inflation, manage their own economies each year. The currency will be used to make micropayments over the internet, and I think Facebook's major reason for doing so is essentially being able to manage their own currency going forward, reduce costs between transfers international, and it'll be interesting to see the relationship between Calibra, the company, and Facebook. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves.
Yeah. And apologies, as I was mincing that last question completely, I completely forgot to ask for our panel to introduce themselves. We've already heard from Lee, but perhaps Scott, we'll take it a step back. Sure. Tell us who you are, what you do, and what do you think Facebook's primary motivation is for launching it?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Hi everyone. Scott Waller. Good to be on the panel tonight. So I'm at EY. I lead blockchain assurance across our Australian business. So that's really helping companies and projects who are looking at adopting crypto or blockchain de-risk the technology, de-risk the governance model, and put in place appropriate controls. So just in relation to the question, so I think both those words are kind of double-loaded, right? Because Calibra is a founder or company, a subsidiary of Facebook, but it's also a wallet. So Facebook have announced that their primary go-to-market for Calibra is going to be around a wallet, which is going to allow integration into some of their existing applications. Think Messenger, WhatsApp, things like that. So it'll be a way that you can actually interact with the Libra blockchain through an application and move money around between people. Same is true for Libra. So Libra is both a foundation and it's the underlying protocol behind the blockchain which Facebook has created. One thing to think about, and I'm sure it will come up across this discussion, is really whether Libra is a cryptocurrency. I think typically within cryptocurrencies there's kind of 2 things you look for as an accepted definition. One, that it's decentralized, and I think in the case of how Facebook have launched this, people would argue whether it's truly decentralized. It's really a permissioned blockchain, so it probably doesn't tick that box. And then secondly, if you look at something like Bitcoin, cryptocurrency that everyone knows, the value of Bitcoin is driven not through some kind of underlying asset, but by the value of the protocol and the technology. So again, doesn't really tick that box in terms of a cryptocurrency. It's probably more akin, as Lee said, to a stable coin. And if you look at some of the definitions, and they're actually tying it to a basket of securities, which might imply it's actually a security. Right? So interesting food for thought in terms of regulation.
Cheers.
Hey everyone, I'm Gemma Green from Power Ledger. Here she is. Perfect timing. That's really embarrassing. I genuinely thought you were.
Were you trying to impersonate me? Similar voices.
So welcome, Gemma, and thanks for being with us. You didn't miss much. We were just asking for panel self-introductions and your thoughts on why you think Facebook are launching their own cryptocurrency. I think maybe we'll keep going with you, Phil, on your introduction. Do you want to tell us who you are, where you work?
Yep.
And then we'll jump straight over to Gemma.
No problems. Hey guys, I'm actually Phil George from Bamboo. Bamboo's an app that makes it easy for people to buy cryptocurrency with a mobile phone and a bank account. So we're all about adoption play. We're about getting cryptocurrency in the hands of more and more people so that people aren't left behind. We're trying to make it something that's not just for the technical people, but for everyone. So I guess the discussion tonight, from my perspective, is a pretty interesting one around adoption, about understanding, about acceptance, and about ultimately the world embracing cryptocurrency technologies. So it'll be interesting what we all have to say. I also think that cash isn't a security, but I don't know about that. We'll discuss that later.
Yeah.
And what was the question I'm supposed to answer?
What do you think are Facebook's primary motivations for launching crypto?
I think that they saw the success of the Chinese equivalents. Basically, we've seen almost 100% adoption and penetration in WeChat in China. These guys have gone from nothing to some of the biggest retail funds in the world by just storing people's cash that was otherwise in the banking system and yielding huge amounts of interest off of it. The model works. It's been proven. You add blockchain onto it, it's even more sexy. I think that that might be the origins of it. We can discuss the technicalities of it later, but that's what I reckon.
Great.
Yeah.
Gemma, can you introduce yourself to us and let me know what your thoughts are on Facebook's primary motivations for launching their own crypto?
Sure. My name's Gemma Green and I'm a co-founder and the chairman of Powerledger. We use the blockchain to enable anyone to trade energy, find energy projects and trade environmental commodities, things like carbon credits. And we are 3 years old and we've got projects so far in the US, Thailand, Japan, France, Germany and Australia. In terms of Facebook and its mission, or its stated mission, is to provide banking services to the unbanked and developing world. And I'm sure that they will spend quite a lot of time and effort doing that. I think that there are some other things. I mean, they've obviously got a large member base that they can leverage for other purposes, whereas most blockchain projects are busy trying to get users, and that's the hardest thing to do. And if you look at like the CoinMarketCap top 100, there's an expectation that either the blockchains or the apps that are sitting in there that they have users, or they're about to get a lot of users, or in the process of doing so. And in the case of Facebook, it's kind of like just add water. So they've got a lot of opportunity for scale in a very fast fashion. In terms of the kind of reaction to them, I think it's very interesting. There was a video made by the Financial Times, quite a beautiful looking video. They've spent quite a lot of money in making it, basically saying how bad it is. And I thought that was quite telling. They've put something very high production in, and the incumbent financial services companies are very worried about what this means.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, the initial impression is kind of split. People that are interested in cryptocurrency between, your kind of crypto utopians who are very first principles versus people that are maybe already work in financial services and have to think of themselves as a bit more pragmatic. But why do we need a new coin? Like, obviously, it's very easy for someone like Facebook to get adoption, but why could they not use something like Bitcoin? And what are some of the design differences that have gone into the Libra coin?
Well, it's not a blockchain, that's the first thing. And
Is that controversial?
well, if you watch the Financial Times video, it kind of unpacks why it's not a blockchain. But obviously blockchain is something that is sexy and has mass appeal. And so I think that calling it that, creates a different level of interest, hype and narrative around it. But I think why don't they use Bitcoin? Well, I mean, there's limitations to Bitcoin. So maybe perhaps they're designing something that has, less traffic on the network and less of the other kind of limitations associated with it. But I think ultimately it'll be something that they're able to have control of. And I know they've articulated the view that there will be one of 100 votes of, other organisations that will be voting on this, and so you can trust us because we're not in control of it. But they will be shaping the way that unfolds, and I think, the fact that they're going to be leveraging their membership base means that they will have a lot of say in how things go.
Scott, do you have any thoughts on the design of the Libra protocol itself in terms of who does have control and how it works?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's interesting that they've gone down this path of creating their own protocol, because obviously there's a lot of protocols already out there, and arguably some that do similar things to what they're trying to achieve. In terms of why they've done that, I mean, they're Facebook and they can, and I think they're trying to be in control, or at least they're coming from a position of control and then looking to relinquish that over time, I think, in order to buy trust from regulators and from their customers. In terms of some of the design principles, I mean, they've gone down the path of setting this up as permissioned, as I referred to earlier, which purely means that not anyone can go and set up a node to perform consensus. You have to put proof of stake, so money into the game, and I think it's $10 million that these companies are stumping up. Yeah, so pretty significant amount of change. That buys you a seat at the table. Arguably, those people have been handpicked. I don't think it was really, first come, first serve. I think if you look at the institutions within there's a lot of large institutions who probably have a lot of skin in the game in terms of the existing monetary system, and a lot of corporates. Right, there's a few exceptions to that if you look in the consortium, but it's primarily large institutions, traditional institutions. So in terms of the design. It's a proof of stake system that performs the consensus mechanism. They've created their own language around the application development. So the protocol itself will allow complex business logic to execute within those financial transactions. So I think someone mentioned micropayments. So think about different rules that could execute based on jurisdictions or based on volume or time of day. And I think they've tried to take some of the lessons learned from some of the earlier projects like the Ethereum Foundation and perhaps some of the challenges from a security, regulatory, privacy perspective and kind of build that into the protocol. One interesting food for thought for me is what are the other players actually bringing to the table at the moment, right? It's like there's this consortium, but if you read the press and look at who's driving it, I don't see a lot of press from any of the other people, yet they're meant to be equal partners in the whole consortium. So is it really a consortium? Is it actually operating like that? It might be called that, but it's certainly not working like that today.
Phil, how much can we call the Libra network decentralized?
Well, right now, I actually leaked some of the questions to my team and asked for their feedback on them. And my team would say not at all, which sounds like a pretty great answer. No, yeah. Essentially, by the sounds of it, unlike on Bitcoin where you've got tens of thousands, more than 10,000 nodes running, which are so decentralized that we've got no way of identifying who all of those nodes are or where they are or who's running them. At the moment, there's 28 or 30, I think we're up to 30 at the moment, of which all of them put $10 million in, so we know exactly who they are. It can't just be like Bob down the road who's become a hobbyist and then wants to start running a node. So that doesn't sound in any way decentralized to me. It's probably more decentralized than, some banks, maybe, but that's about it.
Yeah. It's interesting that one of the buzzwords often used in like crypto and blockchain is trustless. And one of the things that's constantly coming up in the Facebook Libra coin debate is, do you trust Facebook? Right? They've outlined this roadmap where they're going to make the protocol decentralized, or at least they say they're going to, but then implicitly that comes back to a question of trust. To what extent should we put our faith in that to happen and for them to come good on that roadmap?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I don't think that trust is a barrier to adoption. I'll separate that out because I don't think most people spend much time thinking about it or caring. Like, I don't think that the average user of the networks will be thinking, wait a second, before I deposit my USD into this coin, do I trust all of those things? It's, I want this, and Facebook told me to do this, so I'll do it. Like, that's the decision-making process for the majority of consumers, seemingly. That's my opinion, but I'll argue the point if we want. But whether or not, you know, it's trustworthy as an institution, those institutions that are associated are probably as trustworthy as the institutions that are running the current financial system, based on, you know, both demonstrated flaws of the existing companies and demonstrated flaws of the existing financial system. It's probably handing a bad system to a set of other bad systems, maybe. But I don't think either system's perfect. Probably very comparable.
Anything to add to that, Gemma?
Well, I think that the announcement from Facebook, you know, about Libra is very good news for all the other real blockchain projects out there, because it's actually legitimising the industry and you know, creating a narrative that this is something that the largest companies in the world are doing. But as to whether Libra itself will propagate, I think there's a big question mark around the extent to which it will actually get off the ground, given the very strong immediate reaction from the US government. But notwithstanding that, I think that it does, it's a great confidence message to the sector.
Yep. Yeah.
Except you still can't advertise on Facebook for cryptocurrency.
Well, they never said that they weren't hypocrites.
Yeah.
So back to the stated mission, it's to help empower underbanked people with access to financial services. And often in startups you think, what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and is your solution a viable one? If we were to think about how we might, if we were to all start our company right now this evening in this room, and try and solve the problem of bringing financial services to the underbanked, do you think this solution is an appropriate one? Like, to what extent should we run with it, and how does it compare to the alternatives?
Well, I mean, Kiva, which is a not-for-profit that is really looking at providing financial services to the unbanked or the financially illiterate, I think, and they've become a member, I think, organisation of Facebook. I thought that was an interesting partnership, because they have a lot of credibility in terms of doing just that, and that has been their kind of bread and butter for more than a decade. So I think if you did want to utilise the member base of Facebook that is unbanked for that purpose, it could be very much it could achieve its stated ambition. It's just a question of whether there would be any perverse outcomes that occur in the process.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one on industry collaboration, and good to hear that bring companies like that into the fold, because in some respects they've kind of run off, spent all this time and energy and obviously bucket loads of money being Facebook in building something new, when there's probably a lot of companies out there who've been working on this problem for a long time. One of the statements I actually make in the white paper is around, and it's kind of a throwaway line, they don't really go into it anymore, but it's creating a decentralized identity for the world, which has got a lot of people talking, what do they actually mean by that? But obviously your identity is key on Facebook, right? It's the central point of the platform. And given their penetration, a lot of analysts think that maybe that is what they're actually trying to tackle here behind the scenes. The money thing is just a bit of a front, but if they can create a single identity, which again, there's groups within the World Wide Web Consortium who have been working on that. Microsoft have been working on that for a long time. So, there's a risk that we have a lot of competing things here, and they're doing it in a way which has been, up until now, closed source. I know they're saying going forward it's going to be open source, but in terms of the collaboration to date, it's been pretty closed doors. I think key thing around your question for me is just the penetration, market penetration, and the uptake of the platform in emerging economies is undeniable. I think, to use that startup language, the problem statement, $25 billion is spent per year on migrant workers in fees of migrant workers sending money back, to their loved ones at home. I mean, that just seems wrong, right? That in this day and age, that money should be swallowed up by middlemen, and the fees don't represent actual effort that's been involved. So I think there is a problem to solve, and I think if they solved that, they'd get a lot of credit from the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Those platforms are massive in the developing world, and we know that, like I said before, in China, it worked very well with a huge amount of people who didn't have necessarily mature banking environments.
And the uptake
was insane. And those guys, incidentally, the Chinese companies are trying to accelerate their expansion into the Asian markets, just as Facebook's trying to sort of reach the same, because the unbanked is still there's a huge amount of money there.
I might ask you specifically as a fintech skill. I read an article the other day that so Uber, for instance, are going to let their drivers sign up for a bank account with the Spanish bank BBVA, that they can send a proportion of their driver earnings directly to family bank accounts internationally and save a bunch on fees. And I thought that was really interesting because a company like Uber that you wouldn't traditionally consider to be a fintech is increasingly moving more and more into these fintech verticals and releasing fintech-related features. And I think a company like Facebook, to some extent, they've squeezed every advertising dollar out of our personal data and maybe moving to payments and banking and financial services to the next logical step. Do you think, what impact on the fintech industry as it is currently, do you think these large multinational tech companies like Facebook will have generally?
Yeah, I sort of forgot until you just asked that question, but I remember when Facebook announced Libra, the first company I thought about, maybe counterintuitively, was Apple. Apple had just previously announced that they were entering into the financial markets and becoming a credit provider and launching their own credit card. And there was a few little insightful pieces of information when Apple announced that. But Uber have their own credit card. Apple launched their own credit card, and they give you up to 3% back on your purchases, because within their contained system, they can eliminate any of the credit risk that you're having by having a credit card, which shows that there's 3% padding on the payment system. Obviously, otherwise they wouldn't be able to pay for that. That's strictly for Apple products, so it's probably more like 2%. But the point is, these companies are reaching critical mass in their own verticals. They're all moving to finance. Uber has a credit card. Apple has a credit card. Facebook's tried to do a payment platform. Didn't really work. They're going to try it again with mass support. I think that's a critical consideration. These guys they do the GE. GE ran out of ideas, and then they said, we'll become a financial institution, and made way more money in finance than they did with producing any of their products.
Well, I think that's also in part because they misread the play on gas markets and over-invested in gas turbines and lost 2/3 of their market cap as a result of that.
Never let the truth get in the way of a good story, Gemma.
So if we think about, how do we solve that underbanking challenge? Is Facebook Libra going to be a good solution? What do you reckon the number one or number two barriers will be to getting that adoption? Given they've already got billions of users, what could be the biggest barrier?
Regulation will stop them more than consumer appetite. I think that when presented with choices, customers will make split-second decisions, and even if a fraction of the user base say yes, it's significant. But I think the bigger challenge will be the US government and its lack of appetite to support this, and what other jurisdictions I'm sure that's they're busy looking at every country on planet Earth right now, and to see where they might pop up next is probably, and how long it will take them to kind of get another country comfortable with this.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think so fully agree, and therefore the trust is probably more with regulators than it is with the consumer, because I think what they've got is like a dopamine drug that everyone, people like using the platform. It's great. It's a convenience thing. How many people turned off their Facebook account when the Cambridge Analytica thing happened? Probably less than 1% of the user base, right? And the breach doesn't get much bigger than that. So I think that just shows there's what the product people still like, and if you can give something that's convenient and solving a problem, people are going to use it. I think the interesting thing, particularly for a country like Australia, is, so we talk about what problem are they solving. I think it's clear in the unbanked world, what problem are they solving in a country like Australia? So, you know, now we have things like Pay ID and Osaka that have launched. I can instantly send you money now with your email address or phone number, and you'll get it in 5 seconds. So there are already digital payment systems out there. Okay, it might not be blockchain based, but it's in my internet banking app. I can do that with all the big four. So it'll be interesting to see where they target their the deployments, which may be, you know, the consumer problem they're solving, but also the regulatory stance, because some of those emerging markets, you know, may be more open to some of these models.
Yeah, I agree. Regulation is a nightmare. As a company that recently ran a token sale from Switzerland, I can tell you firsthand what it's like flying around the world looking for friendly regulations. Incidentally, it's where Facebook ended up, in Zug, Switzerland. So I don't know whether or not the US Congress even has mandate over the actual foundation. It'll be interesting to see whether they can actually exercise that. They can sort of put pressure on the company Facebook that's based out of the US, but you know, the foundation and its ongoing development, it'll be interesting whether or not there's any impact there. But no, regulation, I agree, will definitely be one of the biggest barriers. I imagine that these smaller, well, not smaller nations, but less developed nations probably won't be a big fan of their currency being seeped away into a multinational that has sort of possibly no one to answer to if they do get through the regulation. So you may see like people or nations pushing back on adoption there on a state-by-state level. But on the counter to that, you were mentioning about like Australia has, you know, these vastly needed but recently improved payment platforms, which is great for us, but it doesn't change the game at all for needing to move money out of Australia. And the minute you move out of Australia, you're running on manual reconciliation networks that are literally reconciled by people almost on a day-to-day basis. It's a terrible system. If you've got people in Europe where we've got staff that have got, you know, they live in 3 different countries for whatever reason, and they're getting fees everywhere. There's still a massive need for those sorts of things. And I think that Facebook and Libra will actually simplify that. But I think that in that instance, they'll be impacting, you know, the TransferWises of the world and the PayPals of the world. It's still going to and from your bank account. Like, in essence, in the short term, the banks will be the friends of Facebook. It'll only be by the point the banks can't do anything about it that the banks realize that Facebook actually just ate their dinner, if they get past the regulations, of course.
Yeah. I think the thing I hear most often as well is people that live in a first world country and a bank having the aspiration to unbank themselves.
Yeah.
Which, if you consider like banking out of bank, yeah, maybe that's the higher order need. So in terms of risks, what's the number one thing that's cast our mind forward, say 3 years, tons of people have adopted Libra, we're using it to transfer payments, all sorts of commerce is springing up. What's the dystopian future? Like, what's the big risk in the room, the one thing that could go horribly wrong that unleashes everything upon the human race? If that's not too dramatic, just answer like, what's the biggest risk?
I think it's got to be primarily around privacy of information and data. I think ultimately there'll be a shed load of transactional information, buying information linked to profiles and people that, you know, if it was used in a way that Facebook used its advertising data streams, which it sold, then, you know, I think people would have an issue with that. Interestingly, they've said that one of the reasons they've set up a separate subsidiary in Calibra is so that it's firewalled between Facebook and this company who have access to the transactional information. However, what they've also said is that if you want to bring in your contacts from WhatsApp or Facebook and send them money, you have to opt in to Facebook getting that data. So I think you can already see that they're going to go down that path. At the end of the day, they're a commercial company. They have shareholders to answer to. They're there to generate money, not necessarily do good for the world. They may end up doing good for the world as well, but I think, you know, that amount of data in the hands of one company. And let's be honest, if people are going to start to use Libra, they're going to link it into their Facebook account because that's the value add. Otherwise, you'll go down another path with another platform. And that's just a hell of a lot of information in one company's hands.
Jerry, on biggest risks we should be looking out for or potential to go horribly wrong?
Climate change.
It's a bigger one.
Caused by Libra.
No. No, I think that, you know, we're talking about banking the unbanked or, you know, and financial inclusion is one of the sustainable development goals. And, you know, solving those problems is, you know, if we don't do that, there are lots of people that, you know, don't have enough money to buy medicine or electricity to refrigerate it. And so I think there's a lot of very big problems that need to be solved. And, you know, it could be a force for good and it could, you know, hasten our ability to achieve some of these sustainable development goals, or, you know, it could just, create more problems than it solves.
Another one of the things that interested me when I was first reading about Libra, when it broke a few weeks ago now, was one of the biggest criticisms you hear about cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin is like they're fake, nothing's backing them, like they're worthless. And Libra is proposing to back their cryptocurrency on a basket of world currencies, which I think creates this interesting kind of dynamic where you could imagine that if Libra coin had mass adoption and people started using it and it had value as a means of transfer, that may to some extent diminish the value of world currencies. But then you've almost got this circular reference where the coin is then still based on the world currency. So let's take a big zoom up to a macro level. What do you think this means for monetary policy of governments? Could they potentially lose control of it, or will this give them more power because they have their fiat currency backing this new cryptocurrency?
I mean, I think central banks have less and less levers right now to deal with problems that exist in economies. We've got, you know, interest rates at record low levels, and bond markets are inverted and have been for some time. And so to stimulate, you know, that basically says, you know, in the next 18 months we're going to have a global recession, and, you know, stock markets have been really overperforming, you know, overheating. And so there's going to be a correction of some kind. And the lever that central banks have is to reduce interest rates, but they're already at record low levels. And so I think they're in a position of diminished power and diminishing power to solve some of these problems. And it'll be interesting to see, you know, what are the alternatives to bail global economies out of these situations.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think where central banks are going to get to with digital currencies is that they will end up embracing them, and that we will end up seeing an Australian, you know, digital currency version and a US currency version in digital form. I think ultimately that is the only way that this can go. If they have concerns around things like Bitcoin and you know, the risk that creates for retail investors. I think you see institutional money going into a lot of those stable coins already in a big way. And I think as a vehicle of transport and use, that it should be a central bank's role to really create something like that. And you already see that with some of the smaller nations, island nations in particular, looking into this. So not directly relating to your question in Libra, but I think digital currencies in general will just be, just like cash is fading now and we all use our credit cards, and that kind of has happened by stealth in the last 5 years. I think digital currencies are next tied to a sovereign currency.
Yeah, I'll answer the question second, but I was just thinking, you know, for places like in South Africa recently, I think the rand's lost quite a bit of its value. A person in South Africa who's able to actually load their salary into something that is a stable coin where they're actually hedging some of their risk of their own local currency. A lot of people can't do that in a lot of places in the world. It's difficult to buy the current ways to hedge with SDRs and things like that. They're not retail accessible. So in a funny way, something like this would be a retail accessible currency basket, which most people don't have access to. Unsophisticated people wouldn't, unsophisticated investors.
But even if you are a sophisticated, well, even if like in countries where, you know, like Argentina or Venezuela, where there's been, you know, so many problems with their currency and the governance that people are trying to get money out, the government has tried to stop them being able to do so. And I think that they would try and impose similar restrictions on digital currency being, you know, a means to extricate funds from the country. So it'll be interesting to see whether platforms like Facebook are shut down or, you know, alternative mechanisms as an attempt to shut them down and restrict citizens' ability to do that.
Yeah, you'd have to expect so, because people aren't just going to give up, you know, their national currency without a fight. Another point that was raised by the team, so it's not my thoughts, but what I was thinking is you said about the central banks will eventually adopt these things. In preparation for this, I thought I'd watch 1 or 2 3-minute YouTube videos, and one of those 3-minute YouTube videos was Facebook's becoming a central bank. And I think on the assumption, so that if we run on the basis that we think that they'll get past regulations and they will get adoption, then I don't think it's about national central banks forming digital currencies. I think functionally that step it may be taken, but it's not a significant step. I think the significant step is just to move away from national currencies, because money isn't like the traditional indicators that point to our economies being damaged, which are things to do with GDP. They're all national metrics. Having national metrics are basically more and more useless in a world where money travels internationally, and national GDP has no relationship to the global economy. So global currency, that's where I think that sort of ends up. And, you know, that opens a whole can of worms, as whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But, yeah, that's where I'd see it going.
And then lastly, what kind of opportunities do you see opening up for fintechs? Libra does experience massive adoption, or even in the rollout of it, for a company like Ledger, would you start accepting Libra tokens in exchange for power tokens, and see there being any opportunities for fintechs and startups generally from Libra coins? I think this mic is actually just a dummy, so only a prop.
So you looked about.
Yeah.
I just think, just to build on the central bank's point, you've seen in the past probably 12 months an interesting phenomena emerge where government, like heads of government, would never criticise central banks and the position that they've taken on monetary policy, but in the US, Trump has been criticising. Well, and I mean, he's been criticising the central bank and disagreeing with the position the bank's taken. And in Turkey, Erdogan has just sacked the head of the central bank, who was 3 years into a 4-year term because he didn't do what he wanted in terms of changing interest rates. And I think in this kind of wave of populism that we're seeing, you know, in different countries, I think we may start to see less independence exist in those places and more political dimensions. And so that will also add another kind of area of concern, perhaps, over their role. And I think the ability to kind of adopt, you know, digital currencies in these banks, I think it may not be sort of the very staid and slow decision-making that you would historically see with central banks, and you might start to see sudden decisions being made, which has not been part of their culture or MO to date.
You could almost imagine a scenario in which Libra experiences more popularity at the same time that people are losing faith in the institutions like central banks, where, you know, at some stage, if that comes to a tipping point, Libra may, you know, unpeg from the basket of currencies and just, you know, there's value in just simply its adoption alone and means of value transfer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to the, you know, there's you know, thousands of coins that exist out there, and I think that, you know, I believe in markets and the ability for markets to make their ultimate decisions. So I think for consumers to be able to choose, the different pairs that they would like to trade with and the value that each of them should have. I think that, that's a good thing. So I think that the liquidity providers for digital currencies is something also that I think is ripe for disruption because, it's very centralised control right now, and that is another kind of frontier, I think, that needs to be disrupted.
Yep. So go from our big macro global economic view and zoom down to the final question, because I do want to open it up to the audience. What are the opportunities for fintechs on a company level? What could we be looking at for that? Do we build a wallet on the Libra network to compete with Calibra? Do we integrate Calibra's wallet? What are some of the opportunities we see out there?
I mean, yeah, I sort of feel bad because I may have spent too long potentially criticising Facebook, but for Bamboo, if Libra was successful, it would be the best thing imaginable, for the basic reason that right now we're an app which requires banking relationships in every single nation that we need to launch in order to be able to offer our product to the customers. Because of the fact that on this system, the entity that's responsible for all of the know your customer and AML requirements, basically that burden goes on to Facebook, or more specifically Calibra or Libra, or I think it's Calibra. Yeah. Then all of a sudden, Bamboo as an entity, as a fintech, doesn't need to worry about all of those burdens, which is very burdensome. It's more burdensome than the actual product development, is the truth. And we would immediately be able to go from being launched in Australia and hopefully soon, New Zealand, to international. We offer our product everywhere that everyone can have an iPhone. So for fintechs like us, not just the validation of the space, how you were saying, big companies are getting involved, and that validates and takes away that sort of used by terrorists mantra from a few years ago. But it also accelerates the path to market for companies like us and makes the world literally our oyster. So, I'm bullish there. I'm excited. But on a technological level, which I think I tried to express at the beginning, I don't think that the technological criticisms of Facebook and Libra will stop it. The only thing that may stop it is regulation, which ironically is the thing that can't stop Bitcoin.
Yeah, so agree with that view, and think that one of the things that I think the fintech industry will get out of this is a framework and solving probably one of the biggest barriers to adoption of a lot of the solutions and products that have been out there, and that's usability. So I don't think anyone's really solved usability challenges when it comes to using crypto.
Have you used Bamboo?
I haven't. Maybe I should.
Yeah.
But also within a corporate context as well. I mean, you see there's a lot of effort that goes into key management, and there's different solutions out there. But I'd say nothing at the moment is very elegant. I don't think anyone's cracked that nut. So to the extent, one of the FANGs can come along and throw billions of dollars at something and come up with an elegant solution that's going to benefit the industry. And I think the whole micropayment space is super interesting, right? So at the moment, these centralized platforms have all these micropayments that they generate through advertising. But if we can actually open that up to a broader ecosystem who can benefit from these micropayments, local companies operating in the Perth context, but in getting that global scale, there'll be all sorts of ideas and innovation that I think is going to come as part of that.
I've got a question. Oh, yeah. You got to say something.
I was just going to agree with you.
Oh, please do.
I agree with you.
Thank you. How many people, if Libra launched today and you could have the Calibra wallet, would actually load up funds into their account now? Okay, so the minority of the room. Yeah. And how many people have signed up to apps like Beam It or Up, like neo-banking startups in Australia at the moment? Okay, so that's interesting. We've probably got a tech-savvy or leaning audience with still relatively low adoption. It's interesting. That's for no reason. I just wanted to say.
So we've got about 10 minutes to open up to the audience for questions on any of our panelists or anything that you'd like to discuss further.
So we've already seen on the ASX, there's been one company that had a really successful business, was growing really well, and they went out and looked to adopt their own cryptocurrency for the purposes of payments, for having greater identification when paying internationally, to improve compliance and reduce costs. And it's a major undertaking to do this. How is Facebook, or do you think Facebook is going to be successful in launching this, but not distracting what they're currently doing? And probably more for Scott, given he works with a lot of these corporates, how does a business that has a core underlying business launch something like this that's so far out of their current core business without just distracting everyone in the industry, everyone in that company from achieving what they do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I think on the second part of that question, I think their answer was to spin it off into a subsidiary and ring fence a whole bunch of people to focus on that problem, assign a CEO of that company and staff up. So I don't know what their staffing numbers are, but I know they've been on a massive recruitment drive over the past 18 months to build that. I think, when it comes to the effort involved and to Phil's point around dealing with regulations and compliance as you get into that crypto space, that's something we've seen a lot at AY, a lot of kind of startups as well coming to us who are trying to get into this space and just grappling with the lack of certainty, the lack of global consistency with regulations, changing requirements, vagueness, and then where things are clear, there's a lot of kind of compliance regulation out there that is just very hard within this particular philosophy to actually implement, and to be confident that if the auditor or regulator comes knocking, that you've got a clean bill of health. So, yeah, I mean, to your point that you spend more time on regulation compliance than you do building product. I mean, that's a pretty damning state of the Australian compliance state, I would say, and we need to try and find a way to fix that.
Not a little bit more, like 80%. it's not. But yeah, you're dealing with people's money. It's not like a normal startup. You're literally you've got to hold yourself to the same account as their banking institution. You plug into their banking institution. You're facilitating a purchase of a commodity, luckily not a financial instrument, but it's still treated as such, and it's overly burdensome, which means, if there is someone who's got a much bigger name and a much bigger bank balance that will go in and do all of that legwork for me and I can plug right into the back of it. Absolutely. I mean, that's what PayPal was to Amazon.
And I think one of the challenges at the moment, why it is so costly for those exercises, is there's a real lack of standards. So, it's very difficult for an external party to come in and give you confidence that you're managing all the risks, right? Because the risk universe is constantly changing. It's such a new domain, and there's these kind of zero-day threats that are out there that you don't know about until it happens to you. So, again, to the extent a large company can invest a lot of money really thinking through this stuff and dealing with it, and then hand that back to the industry, and that almost becomes like a proxy standard that you can then comply yourself to. I think that would be really useful, and it's a lot of what we're seeing in industry with the uptake of things like Ethereum, because of the mass adoption of it. There is now starting to get a lot more comfort from people who are launching products or tokens on that platform, that there's people who have gone before, and there's a track record of what to do and what not to do. Maybe not a standard, but standards are coming. If you look at a lot of the work that the International Standards Organization is doing, I think that will really help reduce cost of compliance and just build confidence. And that's a key thing. I mean, as you say, these things are critical to get right, because there's nothing more damaging for a company than to have a breach. Look at Afterpay and what happened, with the share price and the trust from not just the regulators but the customers when they haven't been doing their AML checks.
Any further questions from the audience? Yeah.
Do you know much about the fees they charge? So, for example, you buy some Libra, you transfer it to a family member overseas, they want to pull it out, use it for cash, for example, buy groceries or whatever it be. Any transaction costs respect to actually pulling it out from Libra into, say, US dollars or other currency. Just basically all the fees that
Yeah.
go along with it.
So others might have more to add. I mean, from what I've read, there are fees. They haven't disclosed what those fees are going to be, of course. Yeah, but what they've said is it's for governance of and development of the protocol and running of the foundation and keeping the membership running is what they've said. But others might have other views.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that some of the transactions like peer-to-peer payments on network will be fee-free rather than transactional costs like you've got on...
Libra to Libra, right?
Yeah, so if I'm paying you on Facebook Messenger, I'm not going to incur fees. I imagine the onboarding system will incur fees, so when you're coming from the traditional banking system in and out, that'll have fees, but that's not their fees. That'll most likely be the fees that are generated from the banking institutions like direct debits and transfer fees that are unavoidable.
And Visa and MasterCard, which
Yeah.
are
They're partners.
their backers.
Yeah. So ironically, you know, even if Facebook wanted to provide a completely free system, they're unable to, so long as they're dependent on on-ramps of traditional banking. And they'll be criticised for that, even if there's nothing that they can do about it. Not to say that they won't make extra money on top of it. But I believe that the way that they're intending on making money themselves and for their partners who have each put up $10 million is essentially the stable basket. Every time someone loads up $5 of Australian currency or whatever, the foundation goes out and buys USD, GBP, yen, and help me out here, EU, I guess, Euro. Yeah. It surprises me they didn't have commodities in there, gold and silver. I thought they would have done a full basket of cash and non-cash commodity. But when that happens, obviously the holdings end up producing a yield. And that yield could be huge. It could, looking at traditional funds that have similar structure, 4-8% sort of thing. And if you're talking about a company or a collection of companies that have 3 billion users, near 3 billion users, and people put up, $100 each, it's
And those units will go to what,
the foundation and the members of the foundation.
non-profit, right?
The foundation is a not-for-profit, so it will only cover its costs. But then all the participants, so the 30 people that we spoke about, they get the yield. And when there's up to 100, all 100. Now, the interesting thing is that, like, when you actually do the sums on that, that's going to be an absurd amount of money that those guys could be making. So they don't need to charge on transaction fees.
I got one question at the back and then... Yeah, I would just like to get everyone's views on control. For example, at the moment, if the US wants what sanctions against Iran, or what sort of transfer of US dollars to that. So how do you people feel about Facebook potentially say, you can't buy medicinal marijuana or some non-patented generic drugs which are cheaper across the border? So the element of control, how do you see it in the future away from national players to international players?
Well, I think it would happen through the wallet providers, is what they're saying at the moment, in a similar way in which they've communicated the AML requirements. So knowing your customer and reporting transactions will be the responsibility of whoever has created the app. So if it's a wallet that you're transacting through and you're buying some goods or trading with a counterparty that is based in an embargoed or a sanctioned country, then there would need to be the application logic built into that application provider to block that and stop that. And Facebook and Libra are saying that's not their responsibility, so they run a protocol, they run a network, they don't run the applications. And so that burden of enforcing that would be pushed down to the application host.
But it will be if they're using the Calibra app.
Correct.
That's
then Calibra's responsibility.
That's then their response. But I think the discussion around whether or not a non-decentralized decentralized entity like Libra will be subject to the whims of regulation to that level. So we see PayPal, for example, blocking accounts. They shut down WikiLeaks account, things like that. It was put to me by my team when I asked them about this that, essentially the argument that we're decentralized may be able to be used against a regulator who says, hey, come and we want you to block these people from payment on your system. And they can go, well, you know, it's not our system, we don't have control, no one has single control. It could be as a means of basically avoidance of legal consequence. And that could be quite an elegant way of doing it, because the regulator probably has no idea what they're talking about, at least for the short term. And it may be defendable enough that by the time they do know, they've already reached critical mass anyway.
Which is the same way the dark web works, right?
Yeah, which is what produced the adoption of Bitcoin. Like it was a net essentially. But we saw PayPal, we saw, you know, large payment providers, even if they're not banks, they block people at the whims. So decentralization, it was put to me, could just be a defense mechanism there.
Essentially front-running the regulation.
Yeah, which is not a unique thing in this space.
We've got time for one more question.
Quick question here on doing internet with a global currency. That Facebook, but China's already got a ban on Facebook. So first of all, how do they overcome that ban? Can Libra overcome that ban, or can other nations do that again? As you know, the US, some senators, they don't even understand the internet, but they now want to
Said it like it is.
How do you become those government blocks, like China has blocks? So that there's the first thing. And the same, China said the other day they're developing their own cryptocurrency, which goes against everything, because people, Chinese citizens are using Bitcoin to move money out of the country, so Chinese cryptocurrency won't work. And Libra won't work in China or any other government that imposes that rule.
So how might government ban Libra?
Like China, really.
Is that the good way of summing it?
I'm not sure they're going to compete in China, because I think, as Phil said, there's already mass penetration of digital payment platforms with Alipay and WeChat, so I don't think it'll be a focus for them.
Not only do I don't think it would be a focus, that these guys might beat Facebook to the punch. Like, these guys are mammoth. The size of these companies that are working in the payment space in China, they've already got agreements, Philippines, India, like they're going through there. It's foreseeable. Yeah, I'd say digital payments. The Chinese are way ahead in penetration and adoption, both numerically and percentage penetration. And I think that, you know, you'll see essentially a West versus East fight for a dominant global currency, which sounds wicked. We need a new Cold War.
So we might leave it there with one final question to each of the panelists. When Libra is launched, are you going to be an early adopter? Are you going to use it and sign up?
Give me some Zuck bucks.
That's a yes?
I'm in, yeah.
That wasn't a yes, that was a joke.
I will want to check out the UX, so yes.
Perfect. And that's the same.